A single exhausted father wiping empty office floors at night, a little girl waking up alone before dawn, a polished boss standing at his doorway with a bag of food. When David typed, "I miss you so much," and sent it by accident, he had no idea that rainy night would expose a wound far deeper than simple loneliness. It was the beginning of a bond quietly engineered by fate, fueled by buried grief and the terror of loving again, ready to turn an ordinary mistake into something dangerously transformative. That fragile connection would have died as a professional embarrassment if Claire hadn't crossed the city to listen between the lines. This is the story of how one wrong message tied 3 broken lives into a fragile promise of hope. Have you ever sent a message to the wrong person? Maybe a simple typo, a name mix-up in your contacts, or your thumb slipping on the screen at just the wrong moment? Most of the time, it's just embarrassing, right? You laugh it off, send a quick apology, and move on with your life. The world keeps spinning. Nothing really changes. But what if that mistake opened a door you didn't even know you needed? What if the person on the other side of that wrong message became the answer to a prayer you'd stopped saying out loud because you didn't think anyone was listening anymore? This is the story of David Mitchell, a widower and single father who accidentally sent "I miss you so much" to his boss late one night. A message meant for someone who could never read it. A confession of loneliness sent to the last person he wanted to see his pain. What happened next changed everything, not just for him, but for his little girl and for a woman who'd been carrying her own grief in silence for far too long. If you love stories about second chances, unexpected love, and the beautiful accidents that change our lives, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're going to want to see where this goes. Trust me, this is one of those stories that reminds you why hope matters. David Mitchell was 34 years old, but some mornings he felt twice that. His joints ached from hours of pushing a mop cart down endless hallways. His eyes burned from fluorescent lights and chronic lack of sleep. His back protested every time he bent to pick up trash or scrub a stubborn stain. He worked the night shift as a janitor at Greenfield Corporate Plaza, a gleaming glass tower in the business district, mopping floors and emptying trash bins while the city slept around him. It wasn't the career he'd imagined when he was younger, back when he thought he'd become an architect or maybe a teacher, someone who built things or shaped young minds. But life has a way of rewriting your plans when you're not looking. This job was steady work with decent benefits, and that's what mattered now. What mattered was keeping a roof over his daughter's head and food on the table. What mattered was health insurance and a paycheck that came every 2 weeks without fail. What mattered was surviving one day at a time without falling apart completely. His daughter, Emma, had just turned 6. She had her mother's eyes, bright and curious, always searching for something good in the world even when the world felt impossibly heavy. She had her mother's laugh too, that sudden burst of joy that could light up a room and make everyone else smile just from hearing it. She had her mother's stubborn streak, her kindness, her way of seeing magic in ordinary things. Her mother, Sarah, had died 2 years ago in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. One moment she was alive, kissing Emma goodbye at the door, reminding David to pick up milk on his way home from work. The next, David was standing in a hospital corridor with a police officer beside him, his uniform still damp from the rain, holding a plastic bag with Sarah's wedding ring inside. A nurse saying words he couldn't process. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. She didn't suffer. He hadn't learned how to stop missing her. He didn't think he ever would." Some losses don't heal. They just become part of who you are, woven into the fabric of your daily life. You learn to carry them, but you never put them down. Most nights, David would get home from his shift around 7 in the morning, just in time to wake Emma up for school. The routine was always the same. He'd unlock the apartment door as quietly as possible, kick off his work boots, wash his hands that always smelled like industrial cleaner no matter how many times he scrubbed them. Then he'd make Emma breakfast, usually cereal or toast with peanut butter, because that's all he had energy for help. Her get dressed remind her to brush her teeth. Pack her lunch if he'd remembered to buy groceries, walk her to the bus stop at the corner, then collapse into bed for a few hours before starting the whole cycle all over again. His sister Beth picked Emma up from school most afternoons and watched her until David woke up around 4. Beth was a saint. She never complained, never made him feel like a burden, though he knew he was. She'd feed Emma a snack, help with homework, play board games or color with her. Sometimes she'd cook dinner for all 3 of them. It was a fragile system, held together by caffeine, guilt, Beth's patience, and the desperate hope that tomorrow might hurt just a little less than today. But some nights, the loneliness hit him like a wave crashing over his head, sudden and suffocating. Late shifts in empty buildings have a way of making everything louder inside your head. The silence amplifies your thoughts until you can't ignore them anymore. Until the grief you've been pushing down all day comes rushing back up, demanding to be felt. The empty hallways echo with memories. Every dark office reminds you of what you've lost. The weight of it all, the exhaustion, the responsibility, the fear that you're failing everyone who depends on you becomes almost unbearable. It was on one of those nights, 3 months ago now, that David made the mistake that would change his life. He'd been cleaning the executive floor, his cart squeaking down the polished hallway, leaving wet streaks of cleaning solution behind him that reflected the overhead lights. It was 2 a.m. The building was empty except for him and Marcus, the security guard downstairs who spent most of his shift watching sports highlights on his phone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a notification from Emma's school about an upcoming parent-teacher conference. He pulled off his rubber gloves, set them on the edge of the cart, and opened his Messages app to add a reminder to his calendar so he wouldn't forget. Again. That's when he saw Sarah's name still saved in his contacts. He hadn't been able to delete it. Couldn't bring himself to erase that final connection. That last piece of evidence that she'd existed, that they'd been married, that she'd loved him once. Every few weeks, late at night when the silence became unbearable and the walls felt like they were closing in, he'd open their old text thread and read through their messages. Mundane things, mostly. Grocery lists. Reminders about doctor appointments. Inside jokes that didn't make sense to anyone else. Her last text to him was still there, frozen in time like a moment caught in amber. Don't forget milk. Love you. He'd forgotten the milk that day. It had seemed so unimportant at the time. He'd been running late for work, distracted by a problem with the car. Now it haunted him, that small failure, that tiny moment of forgetfulness. The milk he never bought. The last thing she'd asked him to do. His eyes blurred with tears. His chest tightened until he could barely breathe, like someone was standing on his ribs. The grief was a physical thing tonight, pressing down on him, making the empty hallway feel like a prison. Before he could stop himself, before he could think about what he was doing or whether it was a good idea, his thumbs were moving across the screen, typing words he'd been holding inside for 2 years. I miss you so much. Every day feels impossible without you. I don't know how to do this alone. I'm so tired, Sarah. I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm not. Emma asked about you again today, and I didn't know what to say. I feel like I'm failing her. I feel like I'm failing you. I don't know how to keep going like this. He pressed send before he could second-guess himself. Sent it into the void to a number that didn't exist anymore, just to get the words out of his chest where they'd been sitting like stones. It was only after the message disappeared, that little whoosh sound his phone made, that David's brain caught up with his hands. His heart stopped. A cold wave of horror washed over him, from his scalp down to his toes. The message hadn't gone to Sarah's old number. It had gone to the contact right above hers, Claire Morgan, facilities manager. His boss, the woman who signed his paychecks. The woman who conducted quarterly performance reviews with a clipboard and a professional smile. The woman who probably thought he was a reasonably competent janitor and nothing more. The woman who had the power to fire him with one phone call to HR to take away the one stable thing in his life. David's hand shook as he stared at the screen. The message showed as delivered. Then, a moment later, God, why was she awake at 2 a.m? The status changed to read, she was awake. She'd seen it. Right now, at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, his boss was reading his most vulnerable moment, the raw grief he'd never shown anyone outside of Beth. She was reading about his exhaustion, his fear, his feeling of failure. Oh God, he whispered to the empty hallway. His stomach dropped. He thought he might actually be sick. What was she going to think? That he was unstable? Unprofessional? A liability to the company? Would she call HR first thing in the morning? Would security escort him out of the building with his personal items in a cardboard box? Would he lose his job, his health insurance, the fragile stability he'd built for Emma? How would he explain to his daughter that they had to move, that he'd lost everything because he couldn't keep his grief to himself? He thought about typing a follow-up. Sorry, wrong person. Please disregard. But what was the point? The damage was done. The humiliation was complete. There was no way to unsend vulnerability like that. No way to take back words that exposed exactly how broken he really was. No way to put the mask back on once it had fallen off. He shoved his phone back into his pocket, finished his shift in a fog of panic and shame, and went home to Emma, who was still asleep in her bed clutching the stuffed rabbit Sarah had given her on her 4th birthday. The rabbit was worn now, one ear coming loose, the fur matted from 2 years of constant hugging. David didn't sleep that morning. He lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, watching the sunlight move across the walls as morning turned to afternoon, waiting for his phone to buzz with a termination notice. He imagined losing his job, losing the apartment, having to tell Emma they'd have to move in with Beth indefinitely. He imagined the look on his sister's face, that mix of pity and exhaustion she tried so hard to hide but couldn't quite manage. He imagined Emma changing schools, losing her friends, her life disrupted again because he couldn't hold it together. But the message that came instead, around noon when he was still lying on the couch with his arm over his eyes, was nothing like what he expected. David, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I want you to know you're not alone in this. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it by yourself. If you need to talk, really talk, not just work small talk, my door is open. No judgment. No HR. No consequences. Just, if you need someone to listen, I'm here. Claire. He read it 3 times, then 4, then 5, trying to find the hidden meaning, the professional distance, the subtle message that he should probably start looking for a new job. But it wasn't there. It was just kind. Genuinely kind. He put the phone down on his chest and cried, not from fear this time, but from something he couldn't name. Relief, maybe. Or surprise that someone had actually heard him. Or gratitude that his mistake hadn't ended in disaster. Or maybe just the release of 2 years of holding everything inside. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Claire showed up at his apartment. David had just gotten home from his shift. Emma was at Beth's house for a sleepover with her cousin something. Beth organized once a month to give David a full day to sleep. He was still in his work uniform gray coveralls with his name stitched on the chest in faded red thread. Still smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and floor wax when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it, expecting a delivery or maybe Mrs. Patterson from down the hall asking to borrow sugar again, and froze. Claire Morgan stood in the hallway of his building, holding a small paper bag from Lou's Bakery down the street, the one with the good cinnamon rolls that David sometimes bought for Emma on special occasions. Claire looked completely different outside of the corporate environment. No blazer, no heels, no clipboard or tablet or professional armor. Just jeans, a soft blue sweater, sneakers, and an expression that was careful but genuinely kind. Her hair was down instead of pulled back in its usual neat bun. She looked younger, more real, more human. "Hi," she said quietly, almost apologetically. "I hope this isn't too weird. Just after your message, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. I wanted to check on you. In person, to make sure you were actually okay." David felt his face burn with embarrassment. His first instinct was to apologize, to explain it away, to rebuild the professional distance. "Ms. Morgan, I'm so sorry. That message wasn't meant for you. I was thinking about my wife, my late wife, and I was trying to—" "I know," she interrupted gently, holding up one hand. "You don't have to explain. I figured it out pretty quickly. But I also know what it feels like to send a message like that into the void and just hope someone, somewhere, hears it. So I thought I'd come by, show you that someone heard, that you're not invisible, if that's okay." David didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight. His eyes were burning. He stepped aside, and she came in. His apartment was small and obviously lived in by someone barely holding things together. One bedroom that Emma used, decorated with drawings taped to the walls and fairy lights Sarah had hung 3 years ago. A couch in the living room where David slept most nights, covered with a rumpled blanket and a pillow with no case because he kept forgetting to buy one. Toys were scattered across the floor blocks, dolls, coloring books, a plastic tea set. Dishes were piled in the sink from the past 2 days. Mail was stacked on the counter, half of it unopened. The place wasn't dirty, exactly, but it had the unmistakable feeling of someone who is doing their best with very little energy left. Claire didn't seem to notice the mess, or if she did, she didn't judge. She set the bakery bag on the kitchen counter with a small smile. "Cinnamon rolls. I wasn't sure what you liked, but everyone likes cinnamon rolls, right? It's basically a universal truth. Like gravity or taxes." David managed a weak smile, the first one he'd given a non-family member in weeks. "Yeah, thanks. That's really kind of you. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," she said simply. They sat at his tiny kitchen table, the one Sarah had found at a yard sale and painted white one weekend when Emma was a baby. Claire pulled out 2 cinnamon rolls, put one on a paper towel for each of them. And for the first time in 2 years, David really talked. Not the surface-level conversations he had with Beth or the other parents at school drop-off. Not the polite small talk with cashiers or bus drivers. Real talk, the kind that costs something, the kind that makes you vulnerable. He told her about Sarah, about the accident, about how the police said she died instantly, like that was supposed to be a comfort, like it was supposed to make it hurt less. About how he was terrified every single day that he was failing Emma because he didn't know how to be both parents at once. About how he worked nights so he could be there when Emma woke up, but it meant he was always exhausted, always half present, always one crisis away from falling apart completely. About the parent-teacher conferences where he felt judged by the other parents with their perfect families. About the mornings when he could barely remember his own name from exhaustion. "Sometimes I forget what day it is," he admitted, staring at his untouched cinnamon roll. "Sometimes Emma asks me something and I just stare at her because my brain is too tired to process words. Last week she asked me to help with her homework and I fell asleep at the table. She drew a picture of me sleeping and put it on the fridge. I'm so scared I'm going to mess her up. That she's going to grow up and realize her dad was barely functioning. That I wasn't enough." Claire listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds or everything happening for a reason or being strong for Emma. She just listened with her full attention, the way people rarely do anymore in this distracted world. And then, quietly, she said, "My husband died 4 years ago. Cancer. Stage 4 pancreatic. We found out on a Monday and he was gone 6 months later on a Sunday. The worst 6 months of my life, watching him disappear piece by piece. She paused, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water David had given her. We didn't have kids, but we were planning to. We'd picked out names, Olivia for a girl, James for a boy. We'd started looking at houses in neighborhoods with good school districts. We'd bought a crib at a garage sale, thinking we'd get a head start. After he was gone, I donated all of it. I threw myself into work because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I thought if I stayed busy enough, if I worked long enough hours, I wouldn't have to feel anything. But the grief doesn't go away. It just waits for you. In the quiet moments, in the spaces between meetings, when you're driving home and a song comes on, when you see a couple holding hands in the grocery store. David looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the sadness in her eyes, the kind that never fully leaves but becomes part of your face, written in the tiny lines around your mouth and eyes. He saw someone who understood what it meant to wake up every day and choose to keep going even when you don't want to. Someone who knew what it felt like to lose your future in an instant. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with everything in him. "I'm so sorry you went through that." "Me too," she replied softly. "But we're still here. That has to count for something, right? We're still showing up, still trying. That's not nothing." Over the next few weeks, something unexpected started to happen. Claire started stopping by more often, not as his boss checking on an employee, but as someone who seemed to genuinely enjoy his company. At first, it was just coffee before David's shift. She'd bring 2 cups from the place on 5th Street, the good coffee, not the burnt stuff from the gas station, and they'd sit on his small balcony for 20 minutes, talking about nothing important. Movies they'd seen, books they'd read, the weather, the news, small things that felt enormous because he hadn't had a real conversation with another adult in so long. Then it became dinners after Emma got home from school. Claire would show up around 5 with groceries and actually cook real food, not just boxed macaroni or frozen pizza. She'd chop vegetables while David helped Emma with homework at the kitchen table. She'd tell stories about disastrous office meetings that made Emma giggle, carefully edited versions that painted her coworkers as comedic characters without being mean. She'd wash dishes while David put Emma to bed, and then they'd sit on the balcony again, talking until David had to leave for his shift. Claire was surprisingly good with kids, patient in a way that seemed effortless funny without trying too hard. Willing to sit on the floor and build elaborate block towers that Emma would gleefully knock down with one swipe of her small hand, laughing that bright laugh that sounded so much like Sarah's. Emma adored her almost immediately, the way kids sometimes do with people who treat them like real humans instead of small, incomplete adults who need to be managed. "Miss Claire, do you like butterflies?" Emma asked one evening, showing Claire a drawing she'd made at school. It was mostly purple and pink scribbles, but if you squinted and tilted your head, you could see wings and maybe a body. "I love butterflies," Claire said seriously, taking the drawing with both hands and studying it like it was a piece in a museum. "Is that you with the wings?" Emma nodded proudly, bouncing a little in her seat. "Mommy used to say I was her little butterfly, because I was always moving really fast and I wore bright colors and I was beautiful even when I had messy hair." The room went quiet. David held his breath, waiting for the familiar ache to swallow him whole, for Emma to start crying, for the moment to shatter into 1,000 pieces the way these moments usually did. But Claire just smiled softly and said, "Then you must be a very special butterfly, Emma. Your mommy was absolutely right. Look at these colors, and those wings look really strong. Like you could fly really, really far if you wanted to. Maybe all the way to the moon." Emma beamed, and David felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not just gratitude, but hope. The fragile, terrifying hope that life might hold more than just survival. That happiness wasn't a betrayal of what he'd lost. that it was possible to honor the past while building something new. One night in late November, after Emma had gone to bed, David and Claire sat on the apartment's small balcony that overlooked the parking lot and beyond that, the city lights stretching toward the horizon. The air was cool, just cold enough to need a jacket. They were sharing a bottle of cheap wine David had found in the back of the cabinet, left over from before Sarah died. Neither of them were big drinkers, but it felt right somehow, a small ritual of normalcy. "I'm scared," David admitted suddenly, the wine loosening words he'd been holding back for weeks. "Not just about being a single dad. I'm scared of this. Whatever this is becoming between us. I'm scared of feeling something again, of letting someone in and then losing them too. I don't think I could survive that again. I barely survived it the first time." Claire set down her glass carefully on the small plastic table between them. "I'm scared too," she said quietly. "I spent so long convincing myself I was fine on my own, that I'd had my chance at love and that was enough for one lifetime. That wanting more was greedy somehow. The idea of meeting someone again feels terrifying, like voluntarily setting myself up for another catastrophe." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the distant city lights. "But David, I think the thing that scares me even more than getting hurt again is the idea of living the rest of my life and never taking this chance. Of being so afraid of pain that I miss out on everything beautiful. Of being so focused on protecting my heart that I forget to actually use it." David's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. "What chance?" She held his gaze, and her voice was steady but soft. "The chance to be happy again, with you. With Emma. I know it's complicated. I know we both have ghosts we're still carrying around. I know your coworkers will gossip and HR might have questions about us, and it's messy in about 12 different ways. But I also know that sometimes, maybe most of the time, the best things in life come from the mistakes we didn't mean to make. From the moments when our carefully built walls come down and we let someone see us." David reached for her hand across the small table. Her fingers were cool from holding the wine glass. "That message I sent you, it wasn't really a mistake, was it?" "Not in the way I thought." "No," Claire whispered, squeezing his hand. "I don't think it was. I think maybe it was exactly what both of us needed, even if we didn't know it yet. I think maybe we were meant to find each other." He stood up, pulled her gently to her feet, and kissed her. It was tentative at first, both of them afraid of moving too fast, of breaking something fragile and new. But then it deepened, and it felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. It felt like permission to want something again. Like proof that his heart still worked, that he was still capable of feeling something other than grief. The next few months unfolded like a slow sunrise after an impossibly long night. Claire started spending more nights at the apartment, first just staying late after dinner, then sleeping on the couch when it got too late to drive home safely, then eventually just staying. Her toothbrush appeared in the bathroom next to David's and Emma's. Her coffee mug, the blue one with a chip in the handle, claimed a spot in the cabinet. Her laughter filled spaces that had been silent for too long, making the apartment feel like a home again instead of just a place to sleep. Emma adjusted faster than either of them expected. Kids are resilient like that, capable of accepting new realities that adults overthink. She started setting 3 places at the table without being asked. She'd grab Claire's hand automatically when they crossed the street. She'd show Claire her homework before showing David, seeking that second opinion, that extra bit of praise. She started saying we instead of me and Daddy. We were going to the park. We made cookies. We watched a movie. Claire moved in officially on a Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after that first accidental message. She didn't have much. Most of her furniture had been sold or donated after her husband died. Like she'd been living temporarily in her own life, never fully committing to staying. David and Beth helped carry boxes up the stairs while Emma directed traffic from the living room telling everyone where things should go with the authority of a tiny general. That night, the three of them made dinner together, an actual meal with chicken and roasted vegetables and a salad, and ate at the table like a family. A different family than before, a patchwork family sewn together from loss and accident and choice, but a family nonetheless. Emma called her Miss Claire at first, formal and a little shy about this new person in her space. But eventually, over weeks and months, it softened to just Claire, casual and comfortable. And then one day several months later, when Emma fell off her bike in the park and scraped her knee, badly enough to bleed and need bandages, she ran straight past David and into Claire's arms crying, "Mom, it hurts, Mom." Claire froze. Her whole body went rigid. She looked at David over Emma's head, her eyes wide, and uncertain and terrified, asking a silent question. Is this okay? Am I allowed to be this? Am I stepping on sacred ground? David knelt down beside them both, his heart so full he thought it might burst. He said gently to Emma, his voice thick with emotion, "Sweetheart, Claire isn't your mom. Your first mom, your mom who had you and loved you from the second you were born, is always going to be your mom. She's in your heart forever. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever will." Emma sniffled, looking between them with tears on her cheeks. "I know, but Miss Claire takes care of me too. And she loves me. And she reads me stories and helps me with my homework and makes me laugh. Doesn't that make her a mom also?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. She looked at David, waiting, hardly breathing. He smiled through his own tears. "Yeah, sweetheart. Yeah, I think it does. If that's what you want. If Claire wants that too." Emma turned to Claire with those big, hopeful eyes that could break your heart and put it back together in the same moment. "Do you want to be my mom? I mean, like, my other mom? My alive mom?" Claire pulled Emma close, crying openly now, not caring who saw. "Yes," she whispered fiercely, her voice breaking. "I would be so honored. You are such an incredible kid, Emma. You're smart and funny and kind and brave. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Can I have two moms then?" Emma asked seriously, like she was negotiating a very important contract. "One in heaven and one here on earth." "Yes," Claire said, holding Emma tighter. "You absolutely can. Your heart is big enough for both. Love doesn't run out. It just grows. There's always room for more." David wrapped his arms around both of them, kneeling there on the grass in the park while other families walked past. And for the first time since Sarah died, he felt something close to complete. Not whole. He'd never be whole again in the same way, but complete in a new way. A family rebuilt from broken pieces. A year later, on a warm Saturday afternoon in May, David and Claire got married in Riverside Park, the same park where Sarah used to take Emma to feed the ducks, where Emma had learned to ride her bike, where all three of them now came on Sunday mornings. It felt important to have the wedding there, not to erase the past, but to honor it while stepping consciously, deliberately into the future. It was a small ceremony. Just close friends, Beth and her family, a few coworkers who'd become friends, and Emma, who was the flower girl and took her job incredibly seriously. She wore a white dress covered in embroidered butterflies that Claire had found at a vintage shop downtown. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, black-eyed Susans, the kind Sarah used to pick on walks. Before the ceremony began, David did something he'd been planning for weeks. He knelt by the pond where the ducks gathered, and Beth stood beside him with Emma. The three of them were quiet for a moment, watching the water ripple in the breeze. David placed a single white rose in the water. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For Emma, for the love you gave us, for teaching me what a good life looks like. I'll never stop carrying you with me. You're part of everything good I am. And I hope," his voice broke. He had to stop and breathe. "I hope you're okay with this." I hope you know that loving Claire doesn't mean forgetting you. I hope you'd be happy that Emma is happy, that we found a way to keep living. Emma placed a second rose in the water, smaller, pink. I love you, Mommy, she said simply, with the clear honesty only children have. I'm getting a new mom today, but you're still my first mom. Always and forever. And I think you'd really like Claire. She's really nice. And she laughs at my jokes. The two roses drifted slowly across the water, side by side, carried by the gentle current toward the far bank. David stood, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. When he turned around, Claire was there in her simple cream-colored dress that moved like water, smiling through her own tears. "Ready?" she asked softly, taking his hand. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready. Let's do this." The ceremony was short and sweet and perfect. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to choose each other every day to build a life that honored both their pasts and their future, to be a family in all the ways that mattered, through good days and hard days and everything in between. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Emma cheered louder than anyone else, jumping up and down and clapping. At the small reception in Beth's backyard afterward, under string lights and paper lanterns, Emma insisted on giving a toast. She stood on a folding chair holding a juice box like it was champagne and said in her loudest 7-year-old voice, "I'm really glad Daddy sent that wrong message to Miss Claire, because now we have her and she makes really good pancakes, and she helps me with math homework, and she lets me stay up late on Fridays to watch movies. And I think my first mommy would like her too, because Claire makes Daddy smile again." Everyone laughed through their tears. David and Claire laughed hardest of all, holding each other like people who'd almost drowned and finally found solid ground. That night, after the guests had left and the decorations were put away, the three of them went home to their apartment, their real home now, full of evidence of all three of their lives overlapping and interweaving. Emma fell asleep between them on the couch during a movie, her head on Claire's lap, her feet tucked against David's side, completely content. Claire ran her fingers gently through Emma's hair and whispered, "Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't sent that text? If your thumb hadn't slipped? If my name hadn't been right above hers in your phone?" David thought about it. He thought about the loneliness, the exhaustion, the fear that he'd never feel whole again. That life would always be about just surviving, just getting through one more day. And then he thought about Emma's laughter filling the apartment every morning, about Claire's hand in his every day, about the way their home finally felt like more than just a place to sleep and eat. "No," he said softly. "I try not to think about that, because I can't imagine my life without you in it now. It would be like trying to imagine breathing without air. You're part of us now, part of our story." Claire leaned over Emma and kissed his forehead gently. "Me neither. You two are my whole world. Everything I didn't know I was still allowed to want. We're a family," Emma mumbled, half asleep, her words slurred with exhaustion. "A real family, forever. Yeah, baby," David whispered, pulling a soft blanket over all three of them. "We really are, forever." Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most beautiful destinations. A wrong number, a misplaced name in a contact list, a message sent in a moment of desperate, aching loneliness when you thought no one was listening, when you'd given up on anyone hearing you. David thought he was reaching into the past, trying to touch something he'd lost forever, trying to connect with a ghost. But he was actually reaching toward his future, toward healing, toward family, toward love he didn't think he deserved. Life is full of accidents that aren't really accidents at all. They're invitations in disguise, opportunities dressed up as embarrassments, doors we didn't even know we needed until someone on the other side opens them and says, "Come in. You're not alone. You never have to be alone again." David and Claire's story reminds us that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean replacing what was lost or pretending the pain never happened or moving on like the past didn't matter. It means making space for something new while keeping the memory of what was sacred and whole and true. It means letting go of the guilt that whispers you don't deserve a second chance at happiness, that being happy again is a betrayal. It means trusting that love, in all its forms and all its seasons, is big enough to hold both grief and joy at the same time. That your heart can break and heal again, and that's not weakness, that's being human. That's being brave enough to keep living. Emma still talks to her first mom sometimes. She tells her about school, about her friends, about Claire, about the life she's building. Claire never tries to erase that or compete with it. She sits with Emma during those conversations, holding space for the complexity of a child's heart that can love more than one mother without betraying either. David still has hard days. Days when the grief ambushes him in the grocery store when he sees Sarah's favorite cereal. Days when a song comes on the radio and he has to pull over because he can't see through the tears. But now he has someone to turn to, someone who understands that healing isn't linear, someone who holds him when the memories get too heavy and doesn't tell him to be strong or get over it. And Claire found something she thought she'd lost forever when her husband died, a family. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd imagined in those hopeful conversations with her husband before cancer took him, but a real family nonetheless. Proof that life doesn't always go according to plan, but sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, it gives you something even better than what you imagined. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that even our mistakes can lead us exactly where we meant to be. Share it with someone who's carrying grief like a heavy coat they can't take off, who needs to know that joy can return without erasing what was lost. Share it with anyone who's afraid to hope again, afraid to love again, afraid to believe that their story isn't over yet, that there are still beautiful chapters ahead. Stay tuned because we have so many more stories like this one. Stories that prove love is always worth the risk. Stories that remind us we're more resilient than we think. Stories about people who fell down hard and found the strength to stand back up, to keep going, to choose hope even when hope felt impossible. David's wrong message became the right beginning. And sometimes, more often than we realize, that's exactly how life works. The detours become the main path. The mistakes become the miracles. The endings become new beginnings. The moments when we're most broken become the moments when light gets in. All because one person, in a moment of unbearable loneliness, reached out into the darkness. And someone else, carrying her own invisible scars, reached back and said, "I see you. You're not alone."